Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... So, this is part 2 of my huge-ass TBR pile that I've decided to burden myself with for the next couple of years. And in the previous video that I uploaded last weekend, I ended up talking about 20 books that I intend to read. This is going to be just a little bit more than 20, so yeah, the video is going to be a little bit longer, but these are books that I had been wanting to read. They're books that have been recommended to me, and yeah, it's going to be a very big diversity of horror here. And some of the books that I'm going to be reviewing are totally going to be titles that are disturbing, so definitely check your trigger warnings. I like to go into books as blind as I possibly can, so I really don't check trigger warnings. I just love to be shocked as it comes. So, yeah, I know I said I would not create another TBR this big, but I have a bookshelf cart thingy that's like 3 levels, and I just said I'm going to fill it up, and that's what I'm going to go to. I'm going to try to dedicate myself to it. I truly am, but I'm also a mood reader, so I know I'm probably going to read other books in between these. So, yeah, here's to hoping I can knock these out sooner than later, but my goal is to find books that's going to scare the ever-loving living hell out of me, and books that I will never forget. So hopefully out of the books I have listed in the previous video and this video, there are going to be some hidden gems in them. But without me rambling on, let's continue forward with the list. First up is an infamous book that I've wanted to read for a long time, and that is Let's Go Play at the Adams by Mendel W. Johnson. And from my understanding, this is about a babysitter who gets tied up by the kid she's babysitting. They invite their friends over, or they have their siblings participate. I'm not sure which, but it ends up turning into a psychological horror story where they all take turns abusing her. I don't know exactly what extent the abuse goes, but it could be nasty. Anyway, this is one of the paperbacks from Hell books, which so far I've read 2 in this series, one of which was When Darkness Loves Us by Elizabeth Engstrom, which that book scared the hell out of me. The first story in that book, it terrified me, and it is still a story that I think about to this day, which I think I had reviewed that book maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it's still very fresh in my memory because it was just that screwed up. The other book I read was The Taking by Bernard Taylor, which I thoroughly enjoyed that one as well. It definitely provided a unique concept that I had not read about before, and I feel like if it had been written about before and people had already been familiar with that concept, I think that the way the author presented it was extremely original. So at this point, I'm enjoying the paperback from Hell books. I am looking forward to this one. I wish I could just knock them all out at once, but that's not going to happen. As I said, I've been trying to knock out some paperback from Hell books, so I have The Nest by Gregory Douglas. And as you can see, there's that little Paperbacks from Hell logo. And I've seen the movie to this, or at least I think I've seen the movie adaptation to this, which it's about these cockroaches that are somehow genetically engineered or like deformed, or they've changed through evolution. I can't exactly remember what. It was a B-rated movie, but it was a lot of fun. It was extremely grotesque. And I've really been wanting to read more creepy, crawly type of books anyway, especially in regards to like worms and insects. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Up next is another Paperbacks from Hell book that I've heard about. I believe there was a movie made of this one as well. I think it was called Baxter. I haven't seen the movie. I'm really not 100% certain on that. But next up, I have Hellhound by Ken Greenhall. And I think this is one of those books where it's taken from the dog's perspective. And from my understanding, it's about a dog that is a serial killer. So, yeah, I really love animal based horror. And when I say that, I'm not talking about horror where animals are abused. I'm talking about horror where animals are the antagonist, because I've just always found it to be interesting. Last year, I ended up reading the Rats trilogy by James Herbert, and I really enjoyed that trilogy. But what I'm starting to notice is animal based horror or aquatic based horror, they tend to be fairly political. So I don't know if politics is a part of this book or if it's commenting on a political social climate, but this is something that I feel is going to be unique. I know it's not the first time a book has been taken from the perspective of an animal, but I am interested to see exactly how badass this dog is. Speaking of animals, the next book on this list is a title that had been recommended to me by 3 people. One of which is the viewer known as Jennifer Jen, another one is the YouTuber known as Spooky Noodles, and the other one is my good friend Tammy. And even though I've seen the movie a million times, I've never read the book, and I'm sure people are going to be like, WTF, how can you call yourself a horror fan if you've never read the book? Well, here I am. And the book is Cujo by Stephen King. Now, I've heard this is a million times worse than the movie. I heard it makes the movie look like Clifford the Big Red Dog. And of course, if you are completely oblivious to what Cujo is about, it's about a St. Bernard who gets rabies and ends up trapping a mother and her son inside of a broken down car. That's the book. And yeah, I am expecting it's going to have a completely different end than the movie because I've heard people say it's very devastating. I've heard that if you are an animal lover, you do not need to read this book, which I am an animal lover, but also at the same time, I can take it. So this is going to definitely be interesting. I'm not sure if it's going to scare me. I wasn't really scared by the movie. There were some jump scares in the movie that really made me laugh and enjoy it even that much more. But I think this is definitely going to be a book that's going to be intense and it's going to creep me out. The next book is one that has been recommended to me by 2 different people, one of which is the viewer known as The Smell of Cedar, and the other one is my good online friend Hanny. And once again, I've seen the movie a million times. I've never read the book. I hear that a remake is coming out. So I feel like this is the perfect time to go on and dive into this baby. Which I had heard rumor that Peter Straub had used the structure of this book when he wrote Ghost Story. Which this is Salem's Lot by Stephen King. And just to show you how long this has been on my bookshelf and has not been read, this was actually gifted to me by a very dear friend of mine back in the day. She was definitely someone who I looked up to. We had bonded over horror. I was maybe like 12 years old and she was in her early 20s. And she was a waitress who we would always have when we went to go eat out. So, yeah, she found out that I made the honor roll and she bought this book for me as a present for making the honor roll. As a matter of fact, she signed it, which I normally don't like for people to sign books unless you're the author. But this is one of the times where I'm really happy that she did sign this because it means so much more to me. It says, Alex, congrats on honor roll. I'm going to expect it all the time now. I know that you have done well and you need to keep it up. and proud of the good work. Love Ginger. So, yeah, this is going to be a fun read. I am really sentimental towards this book for the fact that she did buy it for me, and I can have a reminder that this is something she had purchased for me as a gift because I made the honor roll. I didn't keep it up. I totally didn't. I was a slacker. But yeah, the honor roll did happen every once in a blue moon. And for those of you who don't know what this is about, of course, it is about a creepy old house in a small town that is the haven of a vampire and his keeper. And of course, all of the other vampires that this Nosferatu looking creature creates. So, not sure how different this is compared to the movies, but yeah, I think this is going to definitely do the trick. I'm going to just go on and call it and say that I think this one's going to scare me. The next book that was recommended to me was recommended by two people, actually. One of which is the viewer known as Ghost in the Pages, and the other one is my good online friend Blake Kelly. Now, compared to the other Stephen King books that I just spoke about, I've actually read this one, which the last time I read it, I was in junior high, so I'm sure I'll feel a little bit differently now because I will have grown and I'll be able to see it in a different light. But I love the book and movie equally, but for different reasons. As a matter of fact, I've actually enjoyed all of the movie adaptations of this book, which that is Carrie. And of course, this is the story about a bullied girl who has telekinesis who finally lets the little assholes have it. And while this never scared me, I always found the book to be fascinating. I always found the character of Carrie to be very relatable as I had been bullied as a child. And this is something that I can't wait to dive back into and just really pick it apart, especially in regards to the religious aspects. And I don't know how true this is because I haven't actually read Firestarter, but I've heard people speculate that Carrie and the little girl in Firestarter, Charlie, that their fathers were in the same experiment lab or whatnot. So I really think that would have been cool had Stephen King continued forward with a series of books in regards to young females or males or what have you, that have special powers. Like, I would have loved to have seen this horror version of the X-Men come to be, where each one of them could create chaos by simply using their mind. But yeah, that's not going to happen now. And I am really wanting to read this around prom season, but I've been out of high school for like 20 years now, so I definitely need to see exactly when prom is. And I'm probably going to try to match this up with that time. So, yep, ready for the pig's blood. And while on the subject of Stephen King, we have yet another book by the master of horror. And this was recommended to me once again by my good online friend Blake Kelly, as well as the viewer known as Ghost in the Pages, which I have read this book and I've seen the movie a million times. The last time I read the book, though, I was in junior high, and it did creep me out and it made my skin crawl because it was fairly brutal. As a matter of fact, it was more brutal than the movie. But this is Misery. And in the movie, we have the hobbling scene, but in the book, that scene is substituted with something just a little worse. And in both scenarios, it just absolutely made my heart drop out of my ass. And even though this creeped me out as a kid, I'm expecting it's probably going to scare me as an adult because I think that things like this could really happen. And as an adult, I think it's going to hit differently. So this takes place in the colder months. I have already dedicated myself to the Mayfair Witch trilogy this year. So by the time I come around to Misery, it's going to be a little too warm. But I'm planning on reading this perhaps next winter. The final Stephen King book on this list is one where I've seen the movie a million times, but I've never read the book. And even though I love the movie, it wasn't until, of course, a few years ago that I discovered how bad of an asshole Stanley Kubrick was because of what he did to Shelley Duvall, which was totally fucked up, and no one deserves to go through that crap. But of course, I'm talking about The Shining, which was recommended by Zachary Bynum. And I am aware that the book is very different than the Kubrick movie, which, to be honest, I feel like Kubrick honestly just wasn't that great of a director. I mean, there was maybe two movies of his that I really enjoyed. The rest just kind of it didn't do anything for me. So I'm sure that my subscriber list is going to go down, but that's just how it is. And I know that Stephen King absolutely hated the Kubrick adaptation of this novel. I do know that he really hated that Kubrick made Wendy to be a weak woman. He felt like it was very misogynistic. So I'm happy to see Wendy be a strong person in this book. And for those of you who are not aware of what to expect, this is the story about a family who goes to care for a hotel in its off season. And as they get snowed in, the father slowly goes insane or gets possessed. I think that's kind of open to interpretation. But the young son of the family has a psychic ability that wakes up the ghost of the hotel. And even though this is the version that I have that looks all nice and pristine, this was actually a book that was in my aunt's library. And so here's the original cover, which it doesn't even look like a horror book at all. I mean, it looks like a romance, like a gothic romance. And I wish this was worth like at least $100, I wish, but no, it's not. It's a book club edition. Plus, she was a heavy smoker, so the pages are all yellowed, the dust jacket is torn, and the only value that it has is nothing more than a sentimental value to myself, which I honestly wish I would have read this while she was still alive. She was a big reader. She made a big impact on me being a reader. And I just wish that she was still around so we could discuss some of the books that I have started reviewing on this channel. But yeah, this book I'm not going to crack open, even though it is nice and worn. I'm handling it with care because I don't want it to fall apart and I want this to last as long as I do. Next up is a book that wasn't recommended to me, but I absolutely love this author. I have never been disappointed in anything she's written this far. I thoroughly enjoyed her book, The Good House. I loved The Between. And I also very much enjoyed Joplin's Ghost. When I read it, I still need to revisit that book so I can give it a thorough review. But I have The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. And from my understanding, this is supposed to be a ghost story which takes place in a old school that was inspired by the actual school known as the White House that was in Florida, which this school was extremely abusive to its students. And quite a few students died while they went to this school due to the abuse that they suffered. And I don't know if this is going to be a revenge story or what, but I do know that Tananarive Due has a way of pulling at heartstrings, and a lot of times she does deal in subjects that regard children who are in danger or families who are in danger. And as a matter of fact, her writing is very detailed. It gets very emotional. You can tell she is very motherly. And I have a feeling that this is going to be a book that's going to hit hard. It's going to be something where after I read it, I'm probably going to need to watch like some Disney movie or something. But I am emotionally working myself up to this. I feel like I would like to read it in the summer. It feels like this would be a summer read or maybe a read to start at the beginning of the school year. So definitely summer, August, somewhere like that. Up next is a book that wasn't recommended to me, but it is something I've wanted to read for a while now, which this author, Victor Lavelle, is one who I've been wanting to read more of because ever since I read his novella, The Ballad of Black Tom, I was totally hooked. And I find it really interesting because Lavelle had mentioned he grew up as a fan of Lovecraft, but then when he found out Lovecraft was a racist, he really didn't know what to do with that, considering he's a black man. And that's what ended up bringing us The Ballad of Black Tom. But at the same time, the book is so much more than just cosmic horror, as it focuses on social issues in regards to a hate crime. But with that said, I have The Devil in Silver by Victor Lavelle. And I have heard people say honestly nothing about this book. I don't know why. It seems like all of the love goes for The Ballad of Black Tom, and then that's really just it. But after I read that book, I knew I wanted to add more of his to my library, and this is one that seemed like it was going to be really creepy. It is, from my understanding, about a troubled man who gets institutionalized, and while he's in an institution, he has an experience with a creature that has the body of a man but the head of a bison. And as he starts to speak about that experience, those around him start sharing their stories about how the facility is haunted by the devil. Which I'm assuming, since the entity has the head of a bison, it's only being misconstrued as the actual Satan. I don't really know what to expect of this. I know that he keeps one foot in horror and one foot in fantasy. This could easily just be dark fantasy. I don't know. But it is something that I feel is going to be very original. Up next is another book that wasn't recommended to me, but ever since I buddy read Mexican Gothic with Connie and Hanny, I have been fiending for some more Silvia Moreno Garcia. So I have added to the list Silver Nitrate. Now, I really don't know what to expect with this. I haven't read anything about it. I have not dove into the synopsis. I have not read any reviews. I am trying to avoid what people are saying because I really feel like this is an author where you get more out of her work if you go into it knowing nothing. Which, to be honest, that's true to a degree. I have to backtrack a little bit. That's true to a degree because until I actually started hearing more about Mexican Gothic, I truly thought that was just a Gothic romance. Then I had heard people saying it was a disgusting book, it was gross, and once I heard those two magical words, I went on and cut off everything and dove into the book, and I was not disappointed. This one, I've heard nothing about whatsoever, and I plan to keep it that way because I want to be just as taken by it as I was with Mexican Gothic. All I can assume is, since the book is called Silver Nitrate, we're dealing with something in the film industry. Not certain on that, but I feel like this is definitely going to be a thrill ride. Up next is another book that had not been recommended to me, but I've been wanting to read this author for a very long time, and I feel like it's time to finally do that. Which this is The Hunger by Alma Katsu. And I've heard it's one of those books where you either love it or hate it. I'm pretty open, so I feel like I'm going to fall into that love it category. But this is a book that is historic horror, and it is a fictionalized account of the Donner Party. So, yeah, we're going to get some cannibalism out of this. I don't know if it's going to be disturbing and grotesque, but that's where we're going. Following that is a book that I really wanted to read last December, but since I spent the entire month sick, I honestly just could not comprehend hardly anything, and I'm lucky that I comprehended the Victorian ghost stories that I read. So, because of me just not being able to focus, I wasn't able to read this, but hopefully this year I'll be able to. and that is The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. Now, I've never read her before, and this was recommended to me by the viewer Cody Williams, which he has really good taste. And I don't really know too much about this book, except I've been told that it's beautifully written. I'm assuming that it's gothic due to how the appearance of the cover is. And I really feel like this is going to be the perfect mood read for that gloomy, cold weather. As far as the concept goes, I believe it takes place in a town that's infamous for its unexplained disappearances. And we have a person who moves into an old farmhouse where they find like a journal or a diary or something like that. And we begin to piece together the mystery that has haunted this town. So, yeah, this won't be a summer read. I'm really hoping to dive into this when it gets really cold again. I know this is February, but it already feels like it's spring, so I've already missed that window of opportunity this time around. Up next is a book that I'm really excited to start because I absolutely love everything that I've read by Grady Hendrix, and the person who recommended this to me, I've enjoyed all of his recommendations, which that is Bryce Kirkham. And also, this was recommended to me by the viewer known as Zachary Bynum. But this is We Have Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix. And I really haven't gotten into the heavy metal horror subgenre as far as literature is concerned. It's something that I have wanted to dive into, and I'm really excited to test out the waters with this book. I love how the cover looks like an old Rolling Stones magazine. And from my knowledge, this is about a band who broke up because the lead singer pursued fame and he left everyone else in the band behind. And as the band decides to have a reunion, they hunt down the lead singer, and this leads them on this really strange journey where they eventually wind up at this satanic concert festival. And that's all I really know about this. I have a good feeling that it's going to tap into the satanic panic a great deal. Hendrix is pretty good about tapping into that, or at least he has been with books like My Best Friend's Exorcism. So I kind of feel like this is going to be a love letter to 1980s, 1990s music and the culture that went along with it. Up next is a book that was recommended to me by the viewer known as Mark Lind, as well as Bryce Kirkham. And I'm really excited to start this book because I love the whole cryptid subgenre of horror, but this is Max Brooks's De-Evolution. And from my understanding, this takes place at a campsite or something along those lines where a Sasquatch massacres everyone. And yeah, that just sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun to start with, but the book is supposed to be an oral biography where we are gaining different perspectives from multiple characters who had survived that day. So I do enjoy books that are put together in that format. I remember when I first encountered that format, it was when I read Rant by Chuck Palahniuk, which I really enjoyed that, and I need to revisit it so I can review it. But I do love cryptids a great deal, especially when it comes down to Bigfoot. As a matter of fact, I grew up with one of my favorite horror movies being The Legend of Boggy Creek, and for my honeymoon, my husband and I went to Falk, Arkansas, so we could see the Monster Mart and all of that good stuff. But I am very excited to give Max Brooks a chance, and I really hope that he brings it home with the Sasquatch horror because there's very little of that as far as books are concerned, and I'm just really excited to start this. Up next is a book that was recommended to me by the YouTuber known as Phobophile. And this is pretty infamous from my understanding. I've never read this author before, but this is Brother by Anya Alborn. And from my understanding, the story takes place in the Appalachian Mountains. and it regards a family that's similar to the family that we saw in Wrong Turn or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yet there is a family member who wants to break away from this type of brutality, and I think that this is going to be a book that is going to be extremely gory. It's also going to have a lot of emotion tied to it and a lot of heart that's tied to it. I think that it's definitely going to comment on how a person tries to break away from toxic relatives and the struggles that come along with that. So I could be wrong in that regards, but this is something that I feel like you probably ought to check the trigger warning zone. Next up is a book that I recently did a TikTok on because it had been gifted to me, and I was completely wrong with my assumptions because I was told these are actually cryptids and not aliens. So, yeah, I totally love cryptids. I'm sure this is going to be a fun ride, but this was gifted to me by the booktuber known as Spooky Noodles, which this is Melonhead Mayhem. And this is by, I'm sure I'm going to say the name wrong, Alex Ebenstein. Alex Ebenstein. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but this is actually a new book series out that's called Killer VHS Series. And I'm thinking this is really going to have a lot of fun nostalgia in it. I love the fact that it looks like a VHS. And also, we have like the little back that looks like a VHS cover as well. So I think this is going to be loads of fun. And I really am excited to finally start diving into some cryptid books. This is something I've wanted to do for a while now. So I'm at least getting my toes wet just a little bit. Following that is The Deep by Nick Cutter. Now, a couple of years ago, my good online friend Hanny and myself ended up buddy reading his book called The Troop, which this had been recommended to me by my good friend Tammy. And The Troop absolutely scared the ever-loving living hell out of me. It was gross as gross could be, and it just left me feeling absolutely paranoid. And also, if you are not really into reading about animal abuse, then you probably don't need to read The Troop because there were quite a few scenes of that. And with The Deep, I don't know what to really expect of this. I did briefly read that it is about this virus that causes people to gradually forget things. I think that's all it really does. It just causes them to become forgetful more and more with every day. And as this virus worsens, they discover that there's a cure for this at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. I don't know how the two are going to be in connection, but I'm about to find out. So, up until this point, I really haven't read too many books on killer kids. Like, the one that sticks out in my mind the most was The Other by Thomas Tryon, which I do have the book review of that in my videos if you want to watch it and deal with all of the times I mispronounce his name. But in that subgenre, I decided to try out Wet by Dalton Primo, which I wanted to read this last summer, but I just didn't have the opportunity. And from my understanding, this is about a young girl who has witnessed a horrific event, and after she bared witness to that, she ends up becoming homicidal. So I think that maybe the majority of her killings will take place around a swimming pool or a body of water. And this is just me assuming that due to the little swimming pool ladder that we see here. And of course, this looks like it's going to be a pretty quick read. So I'm hoping this summer it's going to be at the top of my list for warm summer reads. While speaking about homicidal children, this next book was recommended to me by Crystal Haltfer and the booktuber known as Elizabeth Sagewood, and that is Baby Teeth by Zoja Stodge. I hope I'm saying her name correctly, but on the front of the book it says, "We need to talk about Kevin meets Gone Girl meets The Omen." So, yeah, this is gonna be really a damn good book. And it is about a young girl who is definitely a daddy's girl, and everyone thinks she's like just the perfect kid or whatnot, except her mother. She treats her mother like crap, she drives her mother insane, and her mother cannot get anyone to believe her that she is actually raising a hellion. So I don't necessarily know exactly how this is going to play out. I think it's going to be more suspense than horror, but I definitely do think it will quench my thirst for crazy ass kids. Following that is A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. Now, this is about a woman who goes home to see her mom, and after having been away, she returns to see that her mother's house has become cluttered, the warmth has been sucked out of it, and it just feels like a cold, empty shell. Also, her mother has become paranoid. I don't necessarily know anything in regards to if this is going to be supernatural, if it's going to be murder mystery, or exactly what's going to go on. But I do love horror stories that take place in a house, especially if the house feels infamous and creepy and like it's a character on its own, which this is kind of what drew me into the book, was just the title by itself. I'm like, okay, House with Good Bones. There's a vulture in it. This is definitely going to be a ride. Yeah, I'm going to try this. And last on the list is another book by Lucas Mangum, which is Saint Sadist. Okay, so this book is about a teenage girl who is molested by her father and becomes pregnant with his baby. After she runs away, she gets taken in by a doomsday cult where things go from bad to worse. That's really the gist of all I know about this book. Of course, this is published by Grindhouse, and as I've said before, when you have a book by Grindhouse, you have quality work because I've enjoyed the books that they've released so far, and I know this is definitely going to be something that's not your run-of-the-mill horror story. So yeah, it's going to be a thin book. I'm thinking this will be a great one to read between the thick ones. And I don't know if we're actually going to get some supernatural elements here, but I feel like this is definitely going to be a comment on religion. I really do thoroughly enjoy horror stories that are based around cults. They just feel creepy as hell, especially when it comes down to the grooming. So I think this book is definitely going to creep me out. I think it might also gross me out. Not too sure it'll scare me, but here's to hoping. Well, that's my huge ass TBR for the next couple of years, which in a perfect world, I would be able to knock this out in a year, but of course, my day job is pretty hectic, and a lot of times when I come home, I'm just brain dead at the end of the day. So it's probably going to be about 2 years, maybe a little bit more, but I'm going to do my damnedest to knock this out as soon as possible. And yeah, if you have read any of the books that I have held up, just let me know if they're any good or not. Please, no spoilers. I like to go into everything as blind as I can. But yeah, just let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought. So now that we're at the end of this video, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll do that. Also, I do have a $10 tier available, where for $10 a month, I'll still give you the shout out as you see here, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I send out one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off and do whatever you like with it. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can continue to have a good time together. Also, if you would like to hit me up on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.